So Tom, thanks very much for the talk. And you showed some numbers there that each of us burn through 1 barrel of oil equivalent every 5 days. And I think any of us would find that a pretty alarming number. So if you had to pick one or two things that each of us could do that might reduce that, what's maybe the top of the list?
Okay, well, certainly transportation is an important sector because that uses oil directly, and that's going to be the most critical resource in the near future. So limiting the amount of air travel that you do, even driving and consolidating trips and carpooling, all those are obvious solutions that have been around for a long time, but they really do work. Also, I think issues of home heating can be important because a lot of energy goes into heating the home. So if we accept it as somewhat less,
try to get a little better insulation.
Toasty temperature, right.
I know people have been working on that.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that the dream, or maybe the plan, I think, for many people is to live at a Western standard. But when I travel around to other countries, and certainly countries that don't consume nearly the energy we do, a lot of those people seem pretty happy. Is there a relationship between energy consumption and happiness? Or maybe another way to put this is, could we use less energy and still have a high standard of living?
Well, it's a great question, and certainly as a physicist, I know quite well how to quantify energy. It's a little less easy to quantify happiness, but people who have tried to do this and create happiness indices find that once you're at about, let's say, a fifth of America's energy consumption, happiness pretty much flattens out, and there's no apparent gain as we go forward in energy.
Okay, so consuming more doesn't actually make us happier.
No, and in some cases it can make us a little crazy.
Okay. All right, good. So you showed that the solar resource is enormous, many times over what we need. And that's certainly sufficient to fill all of our energy needs. So I guess really there's two questions. Why don't we use more of that now? And what breakthroughs do you think are going to be needed so that we can use more of that in the future?
Well, I think economics has trumped everything in terms of what gets implemented now in the present. Solar has clearly made great strides. There are clearly limitations. I mean, energy, one thing important to realize is energy is not just a mix and match entity. There are issues with each source, and solar is plagued by intermittency. So the sun doesn't shine at night, and we use a lot of power still at night. And so to use solar effectively and use that great resource, let's say that the numbers are there, we could go completely 100% solar and have our needs covered. By the numbers, that's fine. But practically speaking, it doesn't really work so easily. You have to have storage if you want to just go completely solar. And storage can come in a lot of forms. You've got batteries, you can have thermal storage, you could make liquids from either some biological process, biofuels, or you could make an artificial photosynthesis where you just synthesize the chemicals directly in the sun without a biological process. So there are avenues for storage, none of them terribly effective yet. So we can't just pull the trigger and go solar at this moment. I think transportation for me is the biggest linchpin because it's the liquid fuels. It's the only real energy source that's going to get the transportation satisfied. And it's a challenge to go right now from solar to liquid fuels at any kind of scale.
Got it. So we can go solar to electricity, and that's helping somewhat on the electrical generation, but in the transportation side, it's pretty much fossil fuels.
Right. And one thing I didn't really point out in my matrix is that transportation is the hardest thing to do, and electricity is the easiest thing to do. Almost all of our alternative energies have no trouble creating electricity. So I don't think electricity will ever be the bottleneck, but converting that electricity into our useful means of energy can be a little bit difficult.
Okay, all right. So it also looked from the last matrix you showed, although it's pretty complex, that there certainly isn't one solution, but there may be many smaller solutions that could add up. Is that a fair way to say that, or?
I think certainly we're likely to see a diverse mix of energy in the future. Whether they all add up to what we have today is an open question. We don't know that they really can. Again, the numbers suggest that, well, solar trumps everything, and of course it can, but the practical realities in the implementation might prevent it from climbing to an enormous scale. So I think certainly we're likely to see diversity, but you don't really have to have the diversity just to get up to the abundance. It's not like you've got a lot of quarters and you need $1. Okay. You've got some $1,000 bills out there, but it's just hard to cash them.
Okay, all right. Okay, so you also said that you've reduced your energy consumption 4 to 5-fold in your house.
Yeah.
You know, can you tell us what were the big changes that you made, to sort of reach those levels? Because that's pretty significant.
Yeah, certainly. And that's both basically on the electricity front and on the natural gas front. So both about a factor of 4 or 5 reduction. So on the electricity front, it's not any longer using a clothes dryer, line drying clothes. It's being very careful about what resources we have turned on. It's getting a very efficient fridge. Its efficiency is, of course, a big factor, but also just reduced usage. I also installed and built up my own little off-grid solar system so that now when that thing is running, I basically am getting 60% of my energy from that solar resource. And even if you take all of the electricity I use, it's 5 kilowatt hours a day for my solar and the utility. Maybe 3 from solar, 2 from utility. And that's compared to the 35 kilowatt hours of average American use. So that's way down. On the natural gas front, it's not heating my home anymore. So people say, oh, you're in San Diego, big deal. That's not so hard. It's not a huge challenge. And you can't do that everywhere.
Yeah.
But I will say that my house in the winter gets down to maybe 55 degrees. How many people in this country are willing to let that happen?
Yeah.
Okay, so no matter where you are, you could bring it down. So I live at a colder winter temperature. I actually experience winter in a way that people in the Northeast don't necessarily.
Yeah.
And it's not that bad. It turns out that humans can survive 55 degrees.
Yeah, that you can get used to that.
It's not so bad. It's not a hard deal. So that can have a huge effect. Also, how often you shower or do laundry, those use, anything that uses hot water, limiting the use of that.
So it's all the little things that add up.
It's a lot of little things, and it's just a behavioral shift. It's an attitude that it's a challenge almost.
Yeah.
How can I live on much less energy? And you want to take ownership of it.
Okay.
You don't want people to tell you what you have to do, because then it's not fun. You have to create your own ways to save energy.
Okay. All right. The energy efficiency game. Excellent. Okay, so maybe the last thing is, where do you think that research is heading in the future that gives us sort of the best chance, if not to reach that, the American dream of everyone living at a high standard, but at least what's the research that you see going forward here at UC San Diego, but other places in the world, that are going to at least give us a chance to have an energy future?
So I certainly am a huge advocate for research, because I think it's the only way we get to solve these problems. As I said, I don't see it as a panacea. I don't see a white knight riding in to save us necessarily. It could happen, and we have to look for it. And I guess for me, the one possibility that is a complete game changer in my mind is artificial photosynthesis. So it's taking a panel, feeding it water and carbon dioxide, that you could potentially even get the carbon dioxide just from the air, and synthesizing that into a hydrocarbon fuel using catalysts and other things. So you just have a panel that could sit on your own roof and drip fuel all day.
Yep.
So then you've got the storage, you've got the transportation. So that's sort of the holy grail for me personally when I look at the playing field, but it's not a guarantee. It's really hard, hasn't been demonstrated. A lot of active research, and I'd certainly like to see more research in that area, but I don't know that we'll get there.
So a huge potential there, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for the talk today, and of course, good luck with your future research as well.
Sure. Thank you.